My previous video about former mafioso Michael Franzese and the necessary way that he kind of weasels and dances around the question of whether or not he was involved in murders as a mafioso, even though, he had to be involved in murders. Kind of reminds me of how others have dealt with, questions, kind of similar questions. Mickey Cohen, who was not mafia, he was Jewish, but he was a gangster. He was often asked, if he had murdered people, and everybody knew that he had. But when he was asked the question, his standard answer was, I never killed anybody who didn't deserve it. Which, is a kind of sly, wry, not admission. Legally it doesn't say anything. But that was his standard answer. And it also kind of reminds me of, the necessary way that Dorothy Uhnak would deny that her novel, The Investigation, was based on the Alice Crimmins case. And she had to deny that because of the fact to prevent lawsuits. In fact, I remember her saying, I'm a very honest person. And she was asked about it repeatedly. And repeatedly she would say things like, I can honestly say that Kitty Keeler, that was the kind of anti-heroine of her novel, is not Alice Crimmins. And people would ask her about it repeatedly, and she would just as repeatedly deny it. And the reason that she would deny it, obviously, was because she didn't want lawsuits. Because anyone who was in that book might try to sue if she admitted that it was based on the Alice Crimmins case. And it obviously was based on the Alice Crimmins case. Okay. Her insistence that she had in fact made up the character of Kitty Keeler, that that it just happened to be a coincidence, that it was about a mother accused of murdering her children. It was nonsensical because the parallels were very, very close. They were much too close to be coincidental. In fact, it followed the Alice Crimmins case, very, very, it just followed the Alice Crimmins case. Now, of course there were non-parallels. Of course there were characters who didn't appear in real life, and scenes that didn't appear in real life, because it was a novel. And when you're writing a novel that is inspired or based on a real life case, you do have, you do put in a few things to add color to it, But, again, it did follow it quite closely. And the characters had, had real life, real life parallels. They had real life counterparts. For example, there was a character, Vince Martucci, who had was in, he's a boyfriend of Kitty Keeler. He's the parallel to George Rorak, okay, in real life. And in the investigation, she quotes a major witness against Alice Crimmins word for word. Of course, and she seems to want the public to believe, it just happened to be that Dorothy Uhnak, thought about a case and came up with, and just happened to come up with a verbatim, transcript in her mind that followed the testimony of, of a witness against Alice Crimmins. That doesn't make any sense at all. Okay. But sometimes, people will do that, and it's kind of understandable that they do that. It's not necessarily something that's necessarily really horrible. I mean, it is lying,